Will Hurd is a three-term Texas congressman, a retired CIA officer, and today he filed to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. He's joining us tonight for an interview. Mr. Hurd, good evening.
Good evening, and most importantly, I'm a San Antonian.
That's right. Absolutely. You know what? The first person I ever heard about breakfast tacos was from you. So you're true blue San Antonio. And big day for you. How are you feeling?
Look, it's exciting and it's humbling at the same time. My wife and I didn't go into this decision lightly, but the reality is, my mother, who, may she rest in peace, always said, you're either part of the problem, part of the solution. And there's a lot of problems that we're dealing with. They're generational defining problems, from China trying to surpass the United States of America as the global superpower, to persistent inflation at a time when things like artificial intelligence and other technologies are going to change every industry, to our kids having the worst grades in math, science, and reading in this century. We should be addressing those issues, and we don't have enough people doing that. And that's what we're going to try to address.
I wanted to touch on something specifically. You call yourself a common sense moderate, and I'm wondering, in such a polarized political climate like we see today, how do you plan to break through and reach voters in both parties?
The same way I did it when I first moved back to San Antonio after being overseas for 15 years, or away from San Antonio for 15 years, showing up and talking about things people care about. Here's the unfortunate reality. Only about 23% of Americans vote in primaries. That's Republicans and Democrats. So that means 77% of Americans aren't participating in primaries. And one of the biggest reasons that they're not participating is they don't like the candidates that are running. They don't think the candidates are talking about the issues that they care about. And what I learned from representing the 23rd district that went from San Antonio to El Paso, whether I was in a ruby red town or a deep blue city, that people care about issues about putting food on their table, roof over their head, and making sure the people they love are healthy, happy, and safe. Let's focus on those issues, right? And also right now in the Republican Party, we are in this echo chamber where we're only talking to the choir. We need to grow the choir, and if we want to make sure that we're going to be successful in general elections.
To that point, it is a crowded GOP field. There are currently 12 Republicans in the race. And just simplicity, what makes you different?
Well, look, what makes me different is my experiences, right? My experiences in foreign policy, my experience in domestic affairs, and my experience in business, and the ability to meld all of those things together. I've also know how to win tough elections and get independents and conservative Democrats to vote. And I'm someone who knows how to get things done. I was able to work across the aisle to solve problems. And the other difference is, I'm going to treat this election the way I treated my congressional races. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the ground talking to people. So there's going to be a level of accessibility that is going to make me different from the other candidates. And I would just say, listen, this is America. Having options is a good thing, right? We should want more options and have that competition of ideas, because that's one of the things that's made America so great.
Now, in regard to former President Donald Trump, you've been openly critical of him. You've called him a failed politician. At the moment, he is leading in the polls, and I'm curious how you plan to gain traction with voters with that knowledge.
Sure, it's not rocket science, and the reality is this, and we should have learned our lesson since 2016. Donald Trump hasn't won an election since 2016. These polls are a snapshot in time. They do not indicate whether people are going to vote. Everybody thought in the last election in 2022 that there was going to be this red wave, and they were thinking that the day before the actual election. And we all know that red wave didn't materialize. And so part of this is about recreating that big tent Republican Party that has existed for most of my adult life, and talking to people about issues that they care about. That's how we get over that lead. And ultimately, the GOP needs to understand and recognize that if we nominate Donald Trump, then we are giving the election to Joe Biden for 4 more years, because there is no such thing as an independent who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, and then after all the baggage and drama of the last couple of years, we'll be like, oh, you know what? Now Donald Trump's my guy. That just doesn't exist. And so the election is not today. It's a number of months from now,
Right.
and that's why we're gonna spend our time in places like New Hampshire.
As a former CIA officer, what's your position on the classified documents indictment of former President Trump?
Nobody's above the law, and you're innocent until proven guilty. But it is shocking to me that if even one of these allegations in the indictment is true, the fact that Donald Trump willingly had these classified documents and information within those documents, had they got in the hands of our adversaries, would result in the loss of life. And it's a slap in the face of the men and women who serve our country every single day and put themselves in harm's way in order to enjoy the quality of life that we enjoy. As someone who was in that position, who was collecting those kinds of information, who have served alongside the men and women that do that, coming from Military City, USA, to me, it's outrageous that he would willingly do something like this.
On that note, would you pardon him?
No, like the fact that people are talking about pardoning him and there hasn't even been an election is or a case a court case is just insane. And look, the other problem with all this is why people do not want Donald Trump to be the nominee. It's this baggage. Instead of talking about how do we have an unprecedented, kind of peace in the world, how do we have a thriving economy, how do we make sure our kids have a world-class education, we're talking about his baggage. And this is something we know he's worried about, making sure he's not spending the rest of his life in prison versus what's best for the country.
I'm curious, you've called the Trump-Biden presidential election rematch a rematch from hell. What do you think voters need, essentially, that they're not getting from these two candidates?
Well, what voters want, they want someone who's going to articulate a vision of how do we ensure that the United States has the greatest military and alliances that scares our enemies and reassures our friend. They want people to talk about how are we going to use and leverage new technologies like artificial intelligence, not to lead to unemployment throughout the United States, but to increase employment and people moving up the economic ladder. They want to know how are we going to make sure our cities are the envy of the world because they're safe. We've dealt with gun violence. We've dealt with drug addiction. We've been able to address homelessness in a compassionate way. That's what people want to hear, a vision on how you're going to actually achieve those things, and then talk about the steps that you're going to take when you are in office to get it done.
I wanted to talk specifically to, you were elected in a very competitive border district. And so with that perspective in mind, how do you propose we deal with immigration and the border crisis specifically?
This is something, almost my entire adult life, I've been dealing with something. I was the only member of Congress to have ever stamped a visa. That was my day job when I was in the CIA, and at night, my job was to stop terrorists from trying to blow up our homeland. We start with, when it comes to our border security, is stop a policy that actually started under Donald Trump that Joe Biden continued. We have to stop treating everybody as if they're an asylum seeker. Asylum is very specific. You have to be part of a protected class. You have to be targeted by being part of that protected class. And we got to stop doing that. That is what's causing so many people to want to try to come here in between our ports of entry illegally. We also need to streamline legal immigration. This is something that, unfortunately, this President Biden doesn't want to do. One of the reasons is because big labor and unions do not want to see a robust guest worker program. This is why President Obama couldn't get it done when he was in office and held the House and the Senate, and another reason why Nancy Pelosi never brought this up when she was Speaker. And then we have to address root causes in those countries where historically we've seen most of the illegal immigration come from. It's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem there before it gets to our borders. And these are three things that could be done fairly quickly.
In regard to Texas Republicans, I think there's no doubt that you would be a moderate by comparison. But when you look at a national stage and you try to compare it there, do you think that more moderate voters are going to be welcoming and receptive to some of your voting history?
Absolutely. Look, there is more people that look and act like me than not. Not everybody who votes is doom scrolling on social media and consuming cable news every single day. They're more worried about how do they take care of their kids? How do they make sure that they're going to have the funds to pay for their kids' college? How are they going to be able to take care of their aging parents and grandparents? Those are the things that people want to talk about. But unfortunately, we get consumed by some of the things that are only on cable news and social media. And I've proven, look, I had tough primaries as well as tough general elections, and I've proven an ability to win. And I do that by not just preaching to the choir, but I do that by growing the choir.
For Democratic voters, quickly before we have to let you go, for Democratic voters who maybe aren't sold on voting for President Biden again, how are you different from him, and what do you bring to the table to maybe historically voting Democrats?
Sure. Look, the opportunity for Republicans is actually with independents and conservative Democrats. The difference is, one, let's start with our border. Common sense ways where we're not going to have an open border. How we can actually streamline legal immigration, making sure that our economy and dealing with technology so that it improves our economy. How do we talk about legislating artificial intelligence in a way that helps us be the leader in this area, not get passed by the Chinese Communist Party? And then another way I would be different is, the fact that you have the Chinese coming into Cuba, expanding their intelligence footprint in that country, is because of a failure of growing our alliances and networks in the Western Hemisphere. We have to have great alliances, and that starts within our own backyard. And those are just three ways that I'd be different than Joe Biden.
On a lighter note, it is Wemby Day here in San Antonio, and I would love to get your opinion, your energy. How are you feeling about all that?
Look, super excited. It's great for San Antonio. Wemby seems like a great kid. The city is excited, and I think this is going to be the beginning of I don't want to put too much on his very tall shoulders, but I think this is the beginning of a great dynasty. And I think the Spurs are going to be making some moves later in the evening as well, after getting that pretty impressive #1 pick.
Any chance of you crashing the NBA draft?
Well, I don't think that's in the cards.
Yeah.
But it would be fun to go see a pick and see all the Spurs team, and it's been great working with that. They're such a great organization, so important to the city of San Antonio, and I know they're all going to be super excited. I hope they don't do what they usually do, wait for the first full 5 minutes. We know what's going to happen, so I hope when Adam Silver walks out, he doesn't even go to the phone. He just says the Spurs have already made their pick.
Right. Build the suspense, so to speak. Will Hurd announcing a bid for the presidency tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure.
All right.